Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and someone asked me a question which I will flip in here for you guys, and he wants to know, why is Maxx Chewning so small and yet so strong? And notice my reply under there. You know what? This is probably a video I could make 100 times, and there would still be people out there asking the question, so maybe about once a month I should recover this topic, and I think I'm going to do that. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, you know, people love to try to make exceptions to the rule when you say that size equals strength, because they don't really understand what it is that you are saying. And they'll try to use people who seem to be exceptions to the rule, but I don't think Maxx Chewning is an exception to the rule. You should have used Richard Hawthorne. Richard Hawthorne deadlifts and squats a hell of a lot more than Maxx Chewning and is a hell of a lot smaller. How much smaller? Like 40 pounds lighter. Now, why you don't use Richard, I don't know. But let's go into explanations of some of this so that people understand what's going on. And understand that actually Maxx Chewning isn't really that big of an exception to this rule. He really isn't. But people need to understand there are different reasons why certain people display a certain amount of strength versus their size. And when we say size equals strength, that doesn't mean that someone's 1 rep max means that they're always going to be bigger than a completely different individual with a different structure, different muscle insertions, different neuromuscular efficiency, different technique, different leverages. Who's bigger than them? So meaning you can't take people's 1 rep maxes and compare it that way. Otherwise, things like powerlifting and Olympic lifting wouldn't exist. They're all done by weight class. The numbers inside of a weight class vary tremendously. In fact, even the Olympics, say Olympic lifting. You go look at the weight class, the people who qualify for the Olympics, first place versus 30th place, they're massively different. But they weigh the same. They probably have similar amounts of muscle. So variation from person to person matters a lot. And the reason for that, different people, and this is assuming they're even training that way. I'm going to get into that in a minute too. Different people have different genetic leverages. Their tendons insert at different points on their muscles. They have different limb lengths. They have different muscle fiber distributions. All right, that's a big one too. Different muscle fiber distributions. So you need to understand people have different genetics, which means, for example, if one person with a different frame, different insertion points, and has, say, maybe more fast twitch fibers than another person, and they have superior leverages due to the way their tendons and stuff insert for the bench press, and that person gains a pound of muscle in their pecs, triceps, and front delts, they might gain 25 pounds on their bench press from that pound of muscle. And someone else might only gain 10 or 15 pounds on their bench press from putting a pound of muscle in those same areas of the body, because their leverages are different. But you know one thing is for certain, if both of those guys train the bench press so they know the motor pattern, use a decent technique on it, or even a bad technique, hell, a bad technique, and anyone gains a pound of muscle through their pecs and triceps, their bench press is going to go up. And it doesn't matter how they gain that muscle. It doesn't matter if they gain that muscle from using drugs. We have studies on that. People who sit on their ass and use drugs gain muscle, and their bench and leg press went up while not training for 5 months straight, not touching a weight. All their lifts increased. They gained muscle. Doesn't matter whether they did it with high reps, with low reps, with high volume training, with low volume training, their max bench press is going to go up. They're going to get stronger because the primary muscles involved got bigger. Different people gain different strength on certain lifts at different rates from the amount of muscle that they gain. There's a large genetic component to that. There's also can be a neuromuscular efficiency component to that based upon the way that an individual person trains. All right, and that's where there's some confusion created, because a lot of times you'll see guys who are really big and they're not that strong. There's usually only two possible reasons for that. Number one, studies we've looked at do show that when you gain muscle proportionate to drug dose, when people who use drugs, they gain strength from the muscle. They don't gain as much strength on their big lifts from amount of muscle gain as a person who did it drug-free. People who train without drugs seem to gain slightly more strength for the same amount of muscle, per unit of muscle that they gain. They gain a little more strength. And it could be to do with the fact that there is a neural component involved, because obviously anytime a muscle fiber grows, it gets stronger, it contracts harder, it can create more force. But maybe because it's done purely, this is speculation as far as why that seems to be when it was looked at in a couple studies, it could be that they only gained the strength from the drugs, whereas in someone who did more training to gain that same amount of muscle had better motor patterns on those exercises. So therefore they could use the muscle a little more efficiently that they gained. But the thing is, both groups gain strength with it. And that's the thing. People get stronger no matter how they train if it induces growth. Some ways just make you stronger than others. So the drugs can be a factor. And the other thing can be, all right, you'll see a lot of guys who are big. They are muscular. They don't do a lot of big full body exercises. So when you test them on big full body exercises, they're not that strong. But if guys got really big doing a lot of bench press, they tend to be good on the bench press. Maybe they suck on their squat and deadlift because they don't squat and deadlift. They don't do a lot of full body exercises, meaning if you built your legs mostly with leg presses and hamstring curls, you haven't trained your body to use the whole body as one unit. You're going to suck at squatting. You're going to suck at deadlifting. You're going to suck at push pressing. Those people are going to be perceived as weak until you put them on a leg extension and see how much force they generate with the leg extension. Until you put them on a leg press, and if they built massive legs doing 20 rep sets with 1,200 pounds on the leg press, they're probably going to be decently strong at the leg press. They might suck at the squat because they don't train the squat, at least not seriously, and they don't train their body to work as one unit. And some bodybuilders who do way too much machine work and too much isolation work, yeah, when you put them on an exercise that requires them to use their whole body together, they're not good at it. Also, they're not going to be good at a lot of sports because they haven't trained their body to function as one unit. But when you test those individual muscles, you hook them up to a machine and see how much force they can generate with just their pec, or just their bicep, or just their quad, they're actually going to be pretty damn strong if they're really big. They're going to be strong on those individual things. That person could probably strict curl on a machine a fuckload of weight if he has 21-inch biceps. Okay? He might suck at chin-ups because he doesn't do chin-ups. And maybe he hasn't built his lats up properly doing stuff like that. Who knows? Now, odds are that's not going to happen either. But if you test those individual muscles, that person's going to be strong. Now, what people need to understand, you take someone like Maxx, the reason people think Maxx isn't big is because the guy is probably natural. He's probably drug-free. People who are 170 and lean, because the guy is ripped. He is lean as hell. He's a former anorexic who competed at like 118 pounds, I think he said, when he wrestled in high school. And now he's like a 170-pound powerlifter. I saw him say a while back that he's 170 pounds. But if you look at him, he is under 10% body fat sometimes at 170. He is very, very lean. The problem is that people without drugs don't look round and full when they get lean. Because you can take someone else who's got maybe slightly better genetics for roundness in their muscle bellies, and you put them on a bunch of Tren and a bunch of Anavar, and they're 170 pounds, they're going to look bigger than him. They're going to look bigger than him. But they might actually be pretty similar in size. All right, and you've got to remember, really lean naturals rarely look big. They tend to look stringy and small. Sometimes even casual drug users will too, because they're not using drugs to make them look thicker and fuller. So really, Maxx being 170 while being 10% or lower body fat is actually pretty big for a natural. It's just that he's natural. He doesn't look full when he's really lean. He would probably look bigger, particularly in a shirt, if he filled out and put on 10 or 15 pounds of fat. That's just a reality. He would probably look fuller due to intramuscular fat, a little more fat around his muscles. He might actually look bigger, particularly you put him in a t-shirt, he's going to look thicker and fuller. Natties don't look really big when they get shredded. That's unfortunate for people, and there's a genetic component to that too. Some people just look fuller and rounder than others genetically. And when they get leaner, that gives them a big advantage. Right? He just doesn't have those round, full muscle bellies. Now, when you think of total strength, I also saw him say in an interview at that body weight that he sumo deadlifts 600 pounds. That's his only really good lift. He squats 455 and he pause benches 295. Now, if he was any bigger, if he weighed more, everyone would be calling him weak. On the internet, every one of you would be calling him weak. Most of his lifts I can crush, and motherfuckers still call me weak on the internet. So think about that. But it's because of how much I weigh. With me being well over 200 pounds, people are like, oh, you're 500 something pounds squat. Shucks. See how that works? But when you have a guy who's smaller, who only weighs 170, who's still weaker than that, people will be like, oh my God, he's insanely strong. But if someone outweighs him and they lift a lot more, they won't meet the internet standard. So it's this weird bias people have. But think on that for a moment. Because you guys have watched me take his max squat and do rep work without a belt and pause for a 2 count at the bottom. Ass to grass, high bar squats with no belt. I've taken his competition backs and done it on camera. And people will call that weak. They're like, yeah, but you weighed like 220 when you did that. So you guys have to remember there's this weird bias on the internet that if someone gains 30 pounds and all of a sudden lifts for one person, or if you're 40 or 50 pounds heavier, lifts that are insanely strong for one person, but someone who's 50 pounds heavier than them but quite a bit stronger, but if they're only 10 or 20% stronger than that person, they're going to be called weak. It's this weird dichotomy we have on the internet. When you really think about it, the only reason anyone thinks his lifts are fantastic is because of what he weighs. But he's also a natty. Natties tend to have slightly better pound for pound strength than the lighter body weights. He's also really, really lean. Like me, I would have to lose muscle and fat, a pretty significant amount of both to be where he is. And yeah, I would lose strength. Of course I would. But the thing is, it's because of what he weighs that people are saying that. Also, you need to remember, those are his maxes, and he trains for optimal leverages, meaning a lot of what Maxx is doing isn't, hey, how strong can I get on these lifts? It's how much leverage advantage can I use on these lifts to lift more weight? And that's a big difference between training for strength. When I tell people training for strength versus demonstrating strength. For example, he sumo deadlifts, right? And that is his best lift. Like that's the one that everyone's impressed with is his deadlift. But you guys do know, maybe you don't know, a lot of power lifters want sumo deadlifting banned from powerlifting because they know that for people with certain limb lengths, it gives an enormous advantage. Some guys out there can sumo deadlift 50 or 60 pounds more than they conventional deadlift who actually train both. And it's because certain limb lengths, particularly people with long arms, Maxx has long arms, can sumo deadlift with the leverage advantages it gives, can sumo deadlift a lot. And it gives them a big advantage because it cuts the range of motion down. So people with long arms benefit from it tremendously. Because also got to remember, he's a low bar squatter with knee sleeves. We can argue that certain neoprene sleeves, the tight ones that people use, can add weight to your squat. So he uses the form of squat that brings the range of motion the lowest. Again, seeking that leverage advantage. There's a big difference between low bar squatting with sleeves, 455, versus, say, someone Olympic squatting that. There's a difference. And the Olympic squatting is going to build more overall size and strength with the same weight, obviously, because it's harder. Same thing, wider grip bench press. A lot of guys, myself included, promote training with the closed grip. Even a lot of powerlifters train the closed grip. I personally compete with the closed grip because closed grip is easier on your shoulders. And I don't feel getting another 10 pounds out of my bench press in a comp is worth risking injuring shoulders, or at least when I was competing. I didn't care. The 10 pounds wasn't going to make or break me. But the point is, the different techniques that you use, the leverages can allow you to lift more weights. And what you find is that there's a difference there. So people need to remember that if you're talking about people using leverage advantages to lift as much weight as possible for displaying strength. And you need to understand that some people will train differently than that, and they won't use those leverage advantages. And yeah, they lift a lot less weight, and then maybe they go over to those things for competition. And in fact, what I recommend to most people is that you should really build your base for your bench press doing closed grip bench pressing. Yeah, you're going to lift less weight, but it's a safer and better way to train, and I feel it builds it better overall strength. Same thing, high bar squatting instead of low bar. So when you really look at a lot of it from the perspective of his overall muscle mass, versus his strength, he's not like insanely off the charts. He really isn't. But I guess because he's on YouTube and people see it and they see a 175-pound guy lifting respectable weights, it creates this illusion in their mind that this guy who's using ideal leverages to try to lift as much weight as possible, who is a very lean guy, that they're thinking, wow, is this really small guy lifting tremendous weight? But really, in the grand scheme of things, he really isn't lifting tremendous amounts of weight for his size. There are certainly guys out there stronger than that, who are dramatically stronger than that, who are smaller than him, and those are your real freaks. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.